God, thank you for this evening, another Sunday night together with family, another Sunday night to worship you in song, to listen to you and learn more of you and your desire for us through the Bible, and to just be encouraged uh, and just be reminded that we're not alone as we get to engage one another in conversation and prayer. And so, Spirit of God, do as you do. Would you comfort us where comfort is needed? Would you affirm us and encourage us in our current adulting, if you will? And Spirit of God, where conviction is needed, would you awaken us? Would you show us the areas of our life that that you're wanting to transform, and that you're inviting us to allow you in there to transform. So show us, God, that we would repent and give you that space to do your work. We love you. We worship you, Jesus, in your holy name. Amen. Amen. If you could have like one skill for adulting, this is going to be some participation. What would it be? Like if you could have one thing that you're like, man, I wish I had this for being an adult. Anyone? Anyone? What is it? A budgeting. If I could learn how to budget. If I knew budgeting, that would make my life so much better. Or maybe along those lines, if I understood taxes, that would make my life. It's a foreign language to me. What's that? Reading minds? If I could read minds, that may make life a little bit easier. That's true. That's true. I remember when my wife and I were expecting our first child, I remember driving along I-5 one day and kind of thinking like, okay, I'm about to be a parent, which is pretty scary, but okay, I guess this is going to happen. And so I asked my wife, like, what's like one thing, if we could only choose one thing, what's one thing we wish we want to pray for our kids, like we could impart to our kids, what's one thing? And like most of those types of conversations go, I start them and then I just answer the question. It's kind of thinking out loud, I guess. And so I said, how about awareness? I think awareness is like, if my kids were aware, if my kids were like hyper aware of their surroundings, of others' differences, of hyper aware socially, right? Some of us, like, y'all been with people who are just socially unaware, right? And how embarrassing it is, right? No one point fingers, but it happens, right? Some of us have family like that, or we've dated people like that, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is ending tonight, right now, right? They just are like, you're so unaware of what you're saying right now, or how you're sounding. Awareness was my first thought, and then I thought, you know what? It's really good for them to be aware, but if they don't do anything with the thing that they're aware of, like, I don't know how that serves them. So if I got one choice, and it's in line with where we're at probably for the next couple months, I said awareness is up there, but I think wisdom. If my kids possess wisdom, I think they would be able to navigate anything that may come their way. That wisdom is essentially, in some ways, could I say this, that wisdom is the Swiss Army knife of adulting, right? Like if I possessed a wisdom, I could navigate budgeting, you know? Maybe I could consider what the other person is thinking or feeling when I'm in their presence or out of their presence or whatever it is. Maybe I could find someone to help me do my taxes, whatever it is, right? Like wisdom is like, man, if I could give anything to my kids, it would be wisdom. Wisdom is one of those things that I think everyone has an equal opportunity to. Everyone has access to wisdom. And wisdom, as we'll look at tonight in Proverbs chapter 9, wisdom is constantly calling out. Wisdom is calling out for us, welcoming us, wanting to invite us into what, in this poem as it will be put, to what she has to offer. And I don't know about you guys, but do some of you guys wrestle with selective hearing? Anyone? Or been accused of it? I guess you wouldn't admit, like I don't wrestle it, but people have accused me of selective, like I feel, like again, no pointing fingers, Kylie, up front, please don't point fingers. But I've been accused of selective hearing. I hope it's not genetic. Can it be genetic? Because my kids are so messed up if it is. I hope it's not. But if we were to have selective hearing issues, my hope and my prayer is that wisdom would not be one of those things that we tune out or we forget the moment it hits our ears. I pray that we have an ear and a heart for wisdom, because the reality is this, that wisdom is calling, but are we listening? Are we receiving wisdom? Are we accepting wisdom? Wisdom, like Christ, like Jesus, like the kingdom of God, is open to all who wants it. All who wants it. And so everyone has the same opportunity to answer that call to wisdom as well as the call to God. This is where we're at. We're in the book of Proverbs. We're going to be here for a couple months. And Proverbs was written, it's a curation, a collection of wise sayings of Proverbs. 3 to 4 authors maybe. Solomon is the man that gets a lot of the credit for this book. And we looked a little bit at why last week. One of the wisest people to ever walk this earth. And so Proverbs is one of a handful of poetry literature, one of a handful of poetic books in the Bible. And its focus, its purpose is to extend wisdom. Its desire from all those that wrote these Proverbs or those that collected and curated these Proverbs, the purpose is that these collection of sayings of encouragement, of wisdom would inspire others to pursue wisdom. We talked about last week that wisdom, I think naturally most of us, when we think of wisdom, someone being very wise, we think of them being very smart. We think of it being very cerebral, very intellectual. And though that is the case, often when this word wisdom shows up in the Old Testament, many a times it's associated with someone who is a skilled craftsman, with someone who possesses a physical talent and does it well. Therefore, as we're pursuing this book and gleaning for what God has for us, like yearning to see, God, what do you have for me? I've kind of titled it, Skills for Adulting. that wisdom is really a collection. These Proverbs are a collection of skills for adulting, that as we dive into these Proverbs, and we'll do so more starting next week, they're kind of like one-off, one-hit wonder kind of Proverbs. It's scattered. It's like a... You know those calendars where you just have a thought of the day? You get many multitude of those in each chapter. And so, but as we approach this, I believe that there is within the book of Proverbs, in the Bible at large, there's an abundance of skill for living, of knowledge, of wisdom that we can grab and apply so that we might live more skillfully. So here's the question. First of all, is anyone of us here desiring skills for living or skills for adulting? Just make sure we're all kind of in the right space. Okay, because if we want to adult well, we have to have an ear for wisdom. We have to have a hunger for wisdom. Anyone here grow up on Looney Tunes? Is that dating me a little too much? You guys at least familiar? Or maybe not even Looney Tunes, other cartoons or other TV shows. You guys remember that concept where you've got like the devil on one side and the angel on one side? You got a decision before you, a circuit, and you're like, what do I do? And it's like, do this, not do this, do this, do that. You know, I don't believe that to be biblical. that doesn't exist in that forum. However, I do think that the concept is very similar to the way we live life. Often when we're faced with a set of circumstances, we might have a myriad of paths to choose, but if we had to simplify it, it might be one in the way of wisdom and one in the way of foolishness. It might be one that the Spirit of God is inviting us into. Hey, Nathan, this is going to be what's best for you and what I have planned for your life. And we have the spirit of foolishness, or the enemy, or Satan saying, hey, this is what is really best for you. This is really what's going to bring you pleasure, what's going to bring you satisfaction. On Good Friday, I had a conversation with my two oldest children. And we needed to talk to them about things that are happening in culture. And we wanted to be the first to kind of engage this topic with them. And instead of diving into the details of the topic that I needed them to glean or grasp, understand, my wife and I decided that we would approach it at kind of a 30,000-foot view first. I want my children to see that there is a bigger picture at play, that there's a bigger battle being fought than these few segments of society and culture and world. And so we approached it. And I said, listen, guys, you guys remember that Bible verse you know of? Like, we don't wrestle against what? Flesh and blood, but spirits and principalities. Okay, listen, there's a bigger battle taking place. There's a bigger story happening. And there's good and there's bad and there's God and there's Satan. And one of Satan's greatest desires is to gather as many people away from God as possible, is the way I was trying to articulate it to my kids. And the way he may do this is through distraction. And would Satan love to be worshipped? Absolutely. But I think even beyond that, his greatest desire is that no one would worship God. And so he may try to invade in these little details or try and confuse many of us in these details of life. But you got to understand there's a bigger picture at play. It's not us versus them. It's Satan wanting to distract us from who God is and who he created us to be. And so before we can even dive in, again, just like that, before we can dive into the details of some of these proverbs and some of the wisdom literature, we have to understand that as we are adulting, as we are living life, there is a bigger picture at play. That as much as you desire wisdom in your life and godly counsel and the Spirit of God to speak and move in your life, there is also another force at play for your attention, for your affection, for your worship. So just as much as wisdom cries out, so does folly or foolishness. So that's what I want to look at tonight. Let's look at these 6 verses of how wisdom cries out, calls out, and these 6 verses of how foolishness or folly calls out or cries out. Proverbs chapter 9. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 1. Say Jesus if you're with me. Okay, here we go. The way of wisdom. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn it out of 7 pillars. I'm not here to get into arguments of like the true meaning of this or that, and we can do that probably for many hours, but can I just point out to you the simple and the obvious, maybe as we comb through these passages. The first is this. Wisdom has a house, and we'll learn in a couple verses that wisdom will call out to us from that house. This is a poetic telling of wisdom and foolishness, right? And this house is made out of 7 pillars. 2 things I just want to point out to you about this in regards to wisdom and what it reflects of wisdom. One is this. The number 7, biblically, the number 7 represents or often signifies perfection, completion. It was the 7th day that God rested. So where wisdom resides is a place of completion. This house is complete. It's not still forming. It's not still like, we don't know where this room is going to go or how this appliance is going to be added. No. It is secure. It is whole. Wisdom doesn't just cry out from 7 pillars. Like the number 7 isn't just significant. I think the idea that wisdom is constructed, the home of wisdom is constructed by pillars is significant. Because you see here, pillars were not a housing staple of this day. For pillars to be referenced, or for even anyone to have pillars, it was a representation or a reflection of great craftsmanship, of great time. It took incredible time to hew such a pillar. Great patience, great money, great wealth, great perfection, delicacy. So the house that wisdom resides in, that we see here is a reflection of one that has taken its time, of one that may have some life that has been lived, one that comes from a place of completion, a place of wholeness, a place of patience, hopefully signifying or visually painting the picture that wisdom has a place to speak from. When wisdom calls, it's from a place of time and excellent craftsmanship. It can be trusted when wisdom calls. It can be trusted. When wisdom calls, it's not like, I'm trying to work this out and think out loud. No. Wisdom can be trusted. Let me ask you this as we go into these next few verses. Anyone here have friends with hospitality gifts or skills? Like off the chart, like hospitality, like you get invited over and you're like, we're just gonna watch a movie and eat some Cheez-Its or something, and then you show up and it's just like a spread. Like you get there and it is just beautiful. It's like you're eating at a 5-star restaurant. This like gorgeous like walnut charcuterie board, right? And everything's labeled with like calligraphy, handwriting, and when you leave, they're like, hey, before you leave, I got something for you. And it's like a goodie bag. And you're like, we're just here to like watch some Netflix. What's the deal? Just incredible hospitality gift. Check this out. Wisdom, like some of our friends, knows hospitality. When wisdom calls out, this is what wisdom is inviting us to. Look at this, verse 2. She has slaughtered her meat. Let me stop for a second. This is not your store-bought deli meat that wisdom is providing. Wisdom is providing the meat that she has raised, and she herself has slaughtered and prepared for you. She's put in the work so you don't have to. It's love, it's care, it's attention, right? She has slaughtered her meat. She has mixed her wine. That may be adding water to the wine as was customary, or maybe adding certain spices to the wine that it might be robust in flavor. She has also furnished her table, slaughtered her meat, mixed her wine, furnished her table. This is not your typical, I've got some Chex Mix, let's watch The Office type of night, right? When wisdom calls, wisdom provides a spread or a buffet that will not only nourish your body, but it will provide and satisfy all of your needs for living, if we could say, /adulting. It's not junk food that wisdom is providing. It's not like, hey, this will satisfy for the moment. You might get thirsty later, but you can figure that out on your own. No. When wisdom invites us into the home, wisdom is wanting to be hospitable, to provide the place for us to grow and be the man or woman that we were created to be. Look at what else wisdom does. Verse 3. She has sent out her maidens. She cries out from the highest places of the city. This is what she says. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. As for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of understanding. Have you ever in your life found that God uses many things or many people to get your attention? Have you ever recognized that in your life? Like the people, the individuals, or maybe even the items or inanimate objects that God uses to kind of get a hold of your heart or your mind or your focus. This is wisdom. When wisdom calls, she has maidens or workers or messengers who are out helping her rally people to wholeness, helping her turn the hearts and minds of people back unto herself, that she might give what we so need to live as God intended for us to live. God, like wisdom, also continues to pursue us. God continues to use men and women in our lives to get our attention, to wake us up, that we might live as he desires us to live. God, also like wisdom, is respectful but persistent. The call is always there. The invitation is always before us. If we could even say the door is always open. I wonder how many of us have like made poor choices, unwise decisions in the past, and we look back now and we realize, oh my word, God gave me so many chances to avoid that decision. Anyone besides myself? Like God provided him and her and this and that and the flat tire and the credit card not working, whatever it is, made some poor choices, and God gave you every opportunity. He, like wisdom, sent many maidens, many messengers, many individuals to say, this isn't what's best for you. There's another way. There's another opportunity. The call to turn to wisdom is the same for us today. It comes from pastors, teachers, preachers. It comes from classmates. It comes from coworkers. It comes from family. It comes from friends. It comes from strangers. Have you ever had perfect strangers just show up in your life? And it provides something that kind of puts you, it's like bumpers on the bowling lane. You know, it just bounces you back into the path of wisdom. I still can't wrap my mind around this. I was probably maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, and I decided I had enough and I'm running away. I don't know where I'm running. I'm like 7 or 8. I got nothing. I packed a bag full of clothes. I grabbed whatever cash I had, was probably like $1.75, and I'm like, I'm out of here. My dad was out of town, and my mom was by herself, and we're all screaming. Dad's on the phone to check in the family, and I'm like, forget this. I'm leaving you guys. And I'm like, I don't know where to go now. Just walked down the street to a park that was yet built, just big piles of bark. And I just hid from my house, and my mom couldn't see me. No one could see me, and I just sat on the bark. And I kid you not, like, I look down, I look up, then I look down, I look back up, and there's a person. Like, I still believe it to be an angel. Complete stranger with their dog standing in front of me. They didn't say anything. They just looked at me, just endearingly, wanted to make sure I'm okay. And I realized I should probably walk the block back to my house. Silly, but real. And yet illustrative of how God uses different things in our lives to bring our attention back to Him, to call back to Him as Christ is our wisdom. Look at who wisdom calls for. I love who wisdom calls for. Look at verse 4. Whoever is simple. Say simple. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. This is beautiful. When wisdom calls, everyone's invited to the party. Like, we all get to join. Wisdom doesn't have like, hey, let me see your resume before you come in real quick. Can I get a look at your checking account real quick? Or can I get a look at your debt to income ratio if I could real quick? Do you have a title at the place you work? How long you been there? No. Everyone is invited to the party in the house of wisdom. I don't know about you, but that makes me feel like there's some hope. Like, okay, I'm not the most brilliant individual. I barely got into college, almost got kicked out for stupid decisions, but I still have a chance at gleaning some wisdom. I have a fighting chance. Wisdom, much like Christ, welcomes any that are hungry. Any that are hungry. You don't have to have a resume to come to Christ. You don't have to have your stuff together before coming to Jesus. He says, come as you are. We'll take care of that, but just come as you are. Wisdom is open to the simple, the beginners, the young, the naive, those who struggle with commitments. Wisdom says, let me help you with that. Also, like Christ, when wisdom calls and when we listen, life is promised. Did you notice that? Look at the end of that verse there. Verse 6. Forsake foolishness and live. This is the advice that wisdom gives. Hey, you want to stay in this house, you're going to have life. Just forsake foolishness and live and go in the way of understanding. Wisdom is calling. Are we listening? Here's the thing. Here's the tension. It's back to that like Looney Tunes concept. Because every time that wisdom calls, I still think folly and foolishness calls. Right? It's not like, oh, okay, great, wisdom's calling. Let's go. Let's do this. No. For every street we find ourselves in, when we're living, when we're adulting, we come to an opportunity to make a turn. And it's not always going to be clear, left or right. Often, as is the case in my life, I don't know if it is in your life, but so often it's very confusing. What is the way of wisdom? What is a wise choice and what is a foolish choice? Because both wisdom and foolishness is crying out, is calling out. Look at this poem about how foolishness calls out. Jump down to verse 13. This is the way of foolishness. This is the way of folly. And the author wrote these poems in the form of like women speaking. So there's a woman as wisdom and a woman as folly, as foolishness. Look at this, verse 13. A foolish woman is clamorous, is boisterous, is loud, is animated in speech. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knows nothing. It doesn't say that she calls out to the simple like wisdom does, though we'll read that in a minute. It just says that she herself is simple. It says that she's loud, boisterous, simple, and knows nothing. I don't know about you guys, but you know what I've found in my life? And sometimes I'm guilty of being this person, but I've often found that it's the people who know the littlest speak the most and the loudest. Have you guys ever experienced that? Like you're in a room and it's just people that like really don't know what they're talking about, but they seem to be the loudest in the room, the clamorous, the boisterous, the most animated in speech. And you're like, I'm not sure that's right, buddy. I want to be talking so confidently about that. I think you're getting every fact wrong as well as like the whole spirit of what you experience. I don't think that to be the case. This is foolishness. This is folly. This is those that are maybe lacking that awareness piece that I was praying for my kids, right? Look at this. Foolishness is loud. She's simple-minded. She's not very bright or educated, knows nothing. Verse 14, for she sits at the door of her house on a seat by the highest places of the city. We see this similar with wisdom, right? To call to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Again, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. Let me tell you something. If you haven't figured this out yet, Satan is not creative. He's not creative. He just mimics and bites off anything that God has already done. Here, what is foolishness doing? Saying the very same thing wisdom is saying. And I think it's just because she's not creative. She's simple. She knows nothing, right? However, if we're not careful, listen to me, if we're not careful and we're not listening well, we may miss where foolishness takes a turn and reveals her true self. Foolishness starts where wisdom starts. Hey, if you're lacking some understanding, I got you. Come on in here. But look where foolishness takes this turn. Verse 16. Whoever's simple, let him turn in here. That's the same. And as for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, this is where it turns, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there. Those listening to the foolish person, they don't know that the dead are there in that house, that her guests are in the depths of hell. Stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Again, stolen bread. This is what I realized. Foolishness is a freeloader. There's nothing she has of her own. The bread isn't her own. The water isn't her own. I'm not even sure if the house is her own at this point. She's constantly inviting us to engage in things that she herself doesn't have to even offer. And you guys come across this article this week? I don't know. We all read tons of clickbait material, I guess. But I came across this one this week that there's like maybe 2% of us in here that are old enough to even know this show. MTV Cribs, anyone ever familiar of it? Okay, so this was a show for mostly millennials in the 2000s that was played on MTV. It's a channel on cable. It's called Music Television is what it stood for. Just giving you guys a pop culture history lesson here. And MTV, what they did is they go show up at celebrities' homes, musicians, various artists, and they just get a tour of their house. And it's just for them to like gloat at like how rich and fabulous their life is. And you looked in their fridge and you're like, I want that fridge. Just organized with every beverage you could ever want, right? And you go to their garage and they've got at least a dozen cars, just amazing vehicles for whatever they want to do. The pool was the best setup, right? Anyways, I slight tangent on what I envied when I was a child. God forgive me. This is what I was coming across in this article today. A good portion of that, and they named certain celebrities, was all baloney. That many of these people, and they called out some of these people, they had found out that they had rented those homes, or they were rentals. They didn't own the homes. They were rentals for a month because they were working on a project, so they wanted to show off like they lived there. Or they had rented their homes from managers or other people. This is pre-Airbnb, pre-Verbo. This is other rental issues. And those celebrities were then sued by the actual owner because like, what? You didn't have permission to let a film crew come in my house? The cars that they had, didn't own them, rented, borrowed. Many of these celebrities, as this article I was reading today, was very clamorous, loud, boisterous. Look at me. Look what I'm accomplishing. Look what I possess. Look what I have. Foolishness talks a big game, but has nothing of true worth to show for itself. Let me round third with this. Many of us here, and we read even tonight, We hear the cry for wisdom and we hear the cry for foolishness. We hear the cry for foolishness and we either, one of two things can happen maybe when foolishness cries out. We fall flat out for it and we just think it sounds cooler than anything in the world, and so we say yes to foolishness. That may be some of us. We want nothing to do with God. We want nothing to do with wisdom. We want nothing to do with living as God has best desired for us to live and enjoy what he's created. And so we say, no, I'm going in the way of foolishness. Or some of us choose foolishness not because we desire it, but because maybe we've mistaken it for wisdom. It started really well. It sounded really good to begin with. Like, I'm simple. I want to learn. I want some understanding. Yeah, let's engage this. And we find ourselves over some time recognizing like, oh, it sounded like wisdom, but man, it was just foolishness trying to act like wisdom. So let me close with this. Nathan, how do we hear the cry of wisdom, or how do we discern what is foolish and what is wise? Let me ask you, look back in your Bibles. Where did these two voices come from? Do you guys see similarity? Look at verse 3. She cries out from where? Where does wisdom cry out from? This could be participative. The highest places. Look at folly and foolishness. For she sits at the door of her house on a seat by the what? Highest places. Let me close with this. The highest places in this day, that phrase, that terminology, often referenced places of worship. Before the temple was built, before Solomon even got to it, the people of God would worship in the highest places. The Canaanites and many people who worshiped false gods often chose the highest places because that was closest, supposedly, to wherever their god resided, so that maybe they had a better chance of their prayers getting there, their sacrifices getting there, whatever it may be. The highest places were often the places of worship. It's my thought or belief that who we worship or what we worship will often determine who or what we listen to. Brandon and Kylie, you can come up. How do we hear the cry of wisdom? We make Christ the object of our worship. If Christ is the object of our worship, it's not that foolishness will shut up, because foolishness will still begin to cry for our attention, but we are already facing the highest place where wisdom resides. If we choose not to worship Christ and we choose to worship self or whatever this world may offer me, then we already have our back. Not that we can't hear wisdom, because wisdom will still cry, will still send many people to try and turn us around, but we have our face attentive, given to the highest place of foolishness. So, Nathan, how do we hear wisdom? How do we discern wisdom? Can I just put it before you? It begins with worshiping Christ. Where is your highest place, or who are you worshiping upon that highest place? Because both wisdom and foolishness cries out from places of worship. The object of our worship, I think, will often determine our ability to listen, our ability to hear. And again, it's not that foolishness shuts up when we worship God, or it's not that God shuts up when we choose to worship foolishness. Both will be persistent in garnering our hearts, our attention. And close with this verse. Look at this, chapter 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord. This is both the doorway and the pathway. This is a life of worship. This is a place of worship, both in physical posture, emotional, spiritual posture. The fear of the Lord, when we're in awe and reverence, in submission to God, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. My prayer is that as we continue to live and adult, as you will, that we will be a men and women, a generation postured, facing Jesus, and in return receive wisdom, receive instruction. Just as we are humbled before Christ, we would be humbled to receive whatever he has to offer us or give to us in the way of wisdom, and the cry of wisdom.